and good morning.
We
How
lost Totsy during it.
what was that, Dave?
We lost Totsy during it.
No, he's
Um,
still there.
I see him.
Is he there?
I s
no,
Yeah.
it has to do with your screen settings on what view,
You,
because I've got mine on gallery, so
yeah.
I can see all you guys. You're about the size of a small business card.
Got it. Okay.
Welcome, fellas, and we're going to begin again. A thanks to Steve for bringing us that hymn this morning, and we're going to begin looking. We're actually, for the first week, we're on the back side of the cross. Jesus's words, "It is finished." That's in verse 30. We're now delving into 31 through 34, and we're moving into. We did a 2 week segment on "It is finished." The first week was about John's, or my interpretation of John's intent in bringing his audience to that point. It is finished. And last week we projected forward of where it is finished and how it relates to the rest of the New Testament authors. That is, excuse me, union with Christ. And we're going to be spending a lot of time on this idea because it fits, or rather, I fit within that frame of thinking in regard to how I think about the cross. So this morning will be the first movement within that. Um, and I've entitled it, "What We Can See," or "What Can Be Seen." The reason I framed it like this is because this text that we'll be reading is often just kind of moved through as a necessary detail, and it is a necessary detail by the author John, but I'd like to look at it the way I think he is projecting us, or inviting us to look at it. So we read the text in verses 31 through 34, and it says, "Now then, since it was the day of preparation for the Passover, and in order to prevent the bodies from remaining on the cross on the Sabbath, for that Sabbath was a high day, the Jews requested of Pilate that their legs be broken, and that so that they would die and the bodies be taken away." You've heard this narrative numerous times. "So the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first man because he was still alive, and of the other who was crucified with him. But when they came to Jesus, they saw that he was already dead, and they didn't break his legs. Yet one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and immediately blood and water came out." A very familiar text to all of us. And so let's look at it. Introduction. Within the context of what we're reading, after verse 34 comes verse 35. And verse 35, John interrupts the story of the cross. It's like he makes an immediate right turn, puts on the brakes, makes an entirely different insertion within the text. He says, "He who has saw it has testified," him, "so that you," that would be us, "believe." That's an abrupt interaction within the flow of the narrative for a purpose, as expressed in verse 35. His call to attention in verse 35 points back to where we are today, verses 31 and 34. It's not a forward pay attention. It's not a preparation for what's coming next. It's an attention to draw us backward in our thinking to what we're looking at today, right here in verses 31 and 34. So we can read ahead and we want to pay attention to what he's drawing our attention to. John is revealing that belief begins with careful seeing what is right in front of our face. This is why I say it's a thing that we easily kind of go quickly over. Really, much of my thinking has been, well, the death has been accomplished, the debt has been paid, so therefore we can kind of look at this detail and wait for Sunday morning. I'd say let's not go so fast. And we want to pay attention to what John is drawing our attention to, which is depicted at the image on the right. If we rush past what happens here, we can miss what the cross is revealing at this moment, and it has to do with power and life and reality itself, right where we live. This did happen once, according to my belief, but it is showing us volumes of our experience and our journey within our faith right here and right now, and that's what this session is about. So, what can be seen? We're carrying this theme all the way through. Jesus has died, that's clear, verse 30. Yet, the machinery of control keeps moving. Nothing within the larger context has changed. It's life as usual. What then we first see is that the kingdom of this world, remember, fellas, I've referenced numerous times Jesus' statement earlier within John, my kingdom is not of this world. So the way I frame this whole section, or the entire book, is that it is a contrast, a comparison of two different kingdoms, the kingdom of his realm and the kingdom of our realm. So in this case, we look at it from that perspective. The kingdom of this realm has not changed at all. Everything continues exactly as it has. Number one, to emphasize that, the first thing that continues is that the religious authorities, the Jewish religious authorities, in the name of holiness, manipulate the circumstances, invoking Sabbath law to justify violence. They would never be the ones that would go out and break the legs. That's for the Roman thugs. But they are the ones that manipulate the Roman thugs to get what they need. And in this case, it means conveniently removing what is inconvenient would be a better way to say it. And that is what our religious minds do. We can be prone to the idea within our religious circles of removing that which is inconvenient to our belief systems. We tend to separate ourselves. And I have been on both sides of that. I know what it is to be judgmental towards someone else, and I know what it is to be judged by others in a very painful way and being removed out of their world because of one reason or another, because it doesn't fit with holiness in that particular person's mind. Now we bring in the thugs, and I respect these people, but in order to bring it down to this teaching, there is a religious group of people who use manipulation, and there is a Roman brute people that use force. And they go in and actually break the legs. And it's the whole idea to manage death efficiently to keep the religious people happy. The religious people don't want dead people on the cross during a holy occasion, because we're honoring God and we can't have anything like people hanging on a cross in our proximity, because it would offend their view of God. So this is what happens. The religious people act and the Roman law enforcement people act. These are two different strategies, manipulation and force, but the same impulse. Order must be preserved, disruption contained. We need to keep the order the way that we see it as needing to come down. And so one uses manipulation, the other uses force. John doesn't soften this. Remember, we're being called to attention, to pay attention. The cross does not magically dissolve the powers of this age. For many years, I have dealt with this like you for for decades. What happened at the cross? That's really where we're at right now, is what happened at the cross. Well, one thing that didn't happen is that evil was put out entirely, snuffed out at a cosmic sense, in a global sense. That did not happen, because we see life as usual. And we see the people enacting out of the kingdom of this age, they persist, unrepentant, acting as if nothing fundamentally has changed. That is what we're seeing as one side of the coin. We move to the next slide, and we say, but alongside this would be the other side of the coin. John invites us to see something else. Here is the call to attention. And now it's the kingdom of God, the kingdom of his realm. And the kingdom of this realm continues. They both continue. Jesus of Nazareth is truly dead, as it said in verse 30. And yet, reality does not collapse. Remember, he's the one that holds all things together. Creation doesn't unravel at this moment because Jesus has died. He's dead, but creation continues. Christ does not cease. It's not like they had the Father and the Son had a dialogue and said, Father, will you cover for me for a while, because I'm going to be out of operation for 3 days. And when I resurrect, I'll get back and take back over. There is no such, and it sounds a bit foolish, but think about this. He's the one that holds everything together as the Word became flesh. In John 1 and 1 through 4, 1 through 4. But yet nothing changes. Earlier, John has told us that in him all things hold together, and that truth does not pause at the moment of death. Jesus, the Christ, is still holding all things together, even when Jesus of Nazareth is dead on the cross. Here's an example of what I mean. Even the human strength required by the Roman soldier in this image to lift the spear, to aim it, and to drive it forward, that moment is sustained by the one hanging lifeless on the cross. That really gets it down to brass tacks. The very breath, everything about our existence as being human at any given moment is being held together by the one who is dead on the cross. Nothing is taken from the Christ. And you notice I'm using two terms for the same individual, the Christ and Jesus. The Christ indwelt, the Christ who I would equate with the Word, the Christ was in Jesus of Nazareth, but Jesus of Nazareth, being a human being, is dead on the cross. But the Christ continues, and the Christ is the one who will raise from the dead. Nothing's taken away from the Christ. Everything is allowed. Death does not interrupt life. Okay, this is really important. Death does not interrupt life. It can't, because life is authored by God Almighty, being administrated through the Word, and the Word became flesh. Rather, death fails to contain it. Death fails to contain life. That is a huge message from the cross. And it's in our text. Death cannot hold him. He conquered death through death. This is where John slows us down, and here's to call us to attention to what to see. He's in that now, but let's look at this moment of action. The spear that is piercing the side of Jesus is thrust in, and out comes blood and water. We know that. We've read it numerous times. This is not meant, as I have interpreted for decades, to be a graphic detail for emphasis, to get the R rating, so to speak, to make it an exclamation point. He's really dead. I don't think that is the primary meaning that John is implying at this moment. Rather, John has been preparing us for this moment throughout his entire account. And his entire account is about the incarnation of Jesus, he becoming Christ, the Word taking on human flesh, John chapter 1, verse 14. And the entire text is about what that looks like, God in flesh, culminating at this very moment that we just read about. And so he's prepared us for this moment, in his case, the first century church, to make a point. And here is a major point. Major point. The people of that time, like much in our thinking as well, the people of that time, because of the sacrificial system, the whole Levitic system, they know that blood signifies life given for the whole. This was ingrained within their psyche, that one is killed for the many. The idea of substitution, very, very clear. According to Hebrews, it's also very clear that God never needed that, but he allowed it because the people needed it. And that's Hebrews chapter 10. But regardless, blood is known within that context, and within our context, being from Protestant evangelical upbringings, that the blood signifies life given. The blood is the life, as the text says, and it's given for the whole. In this case, as John 3:16 states, he died for all humanity, everyone, died for all. The Christ, the Jesus of Nazareth, giving his life as a substitute for the whole. And that language fits with our way of thinking. I understand that. The second thing that we see here in the text is water flows out of his side, and water signifies life shared, birth, renewal, communion. That's how he says, I am the water of life. It's about communion. It's about solidarity and oneness coming together. So um, these two ideas, John places detail within this text right after the cross for a reason, showing us blood signifies life given for the whole, water signifying life shared. What emerges now? Here's my so what kind of response. What emerges at this moment from Jesus, the dead Jesus, is not retaliation. Well, we know that dead people can't retaliate, nor is there a sudden crash or a glitch in creation. Creation, it continues, the one holding all things together, nor is there some sort of mysterious absence of presence. We may think that, but there isn't, because it is verified in the fact that life is continuing. Jesus is there, but rather, what comes out of Jesus at this moment is life from death. Life is flowing from death right here. It can't be any more clear. And so as we focus in on the spear being thrust into his side, through the thrust of that spear, we see this. And this is how we can view the cross, fellas. One way we can. Through that thrust of the spear, we see the worst of the human condition. We see violence. Everything in that spear is the worst of humanity. There's a noble side, wonderful side, but we're not talking about that here. The worst of the human condition is seen in that action of the thrusting of the spear. Yet, on the other side, from Jesus's dead body flows blood and water, which represent life given and life shared, revealing that even in the worst, love has never left and communion still emerges. It's not over. It is not over at all. Now, side note, if you and I can think of the cross from this little image that John is calling our attention to, and he says that you may believe, this was placed here by the biblical author to give us a window in how to view the cross. Image is provided by John to help us understand how to understand the cross. We're not going to conquer it, because there's a lot of mystery, but we can understand that the primary way to view the cross is by seeing the violence of the human condition, humans killing Jesus, and the unconditional love of God continuing, that life and life continues to flow and life continues to be shared. Thus his invitation in verse 35. So I'm tying these thoughts exactly with what we're going to look at next week in verse 35. This picture right here is a way that we can begin to understand what happened on the cross. Here's a summary. John wants us to believe, which he states in verse 35, by learning how to see the depth of God with us, God for us. God never left us in our worst. God remains. God with us, God for us. Number two, the cross does not end the power of this age by overpowering it. That is so critical. That's why there is no retaliation. He's allowing the evil, sin, and death to exhaust itself to its full end. He's not using power. That would be the kingdom of this world. But the kingdom of this world is being exposed, and it's being allowed to dissipate its own energy here at the cross. It becomes empty at this moment. No power. The third is that at the same time, the cross reveals, this is what this image is telling us, by the way, fellows. At the same time, the cross reveals a deeper power, a life that continues to give itself even when pierced. The blood and the water continues to flow. Nothing in the economy of God has changed. Humanity at its worst, God at its fullest moment. So what we observe at the cross is not the satisfaction of a divine need. This is what I was raised on. The satisfaction that God needed something, in this case, justice, and that justice was satisfied so he can accept me and us. That is how I framed it for decades. Well, a long time, maybe not decades, but rather love, the way to view the cross, but rather love at its fullest, and that a love that has never left. God is with us and God is for us. Now, in the table time, according to John's gospel, to see the cross is to see that. This is a summary of the summary, actually. Here's about 4 points. This is what we talked about this morning. Jesus dies, yes, but the Christ remains, yes. Nothing in heaven has changed, and it's verifiable to the fact that creation did not collapse. Number two, the world wounds love, the spear, yet is still held together by it. Again, nothing has changed in God's love for all humanity. And even in death, life continues to flow, the blood and the water. How does this view, here's our question that we can take to the discussion. We got 30 minutes, which is really cool. How does this view of belief compare, contrast, or support your view of what belief is to be all about? That's the launching question. Feel free to respond to that, or as you guys take liberty time after time, your own comments are fine as well. So let's go into our table time, and I think we'd all love to hear what you guys have to say. So.
Like, first off, there's sort of I was raised with it sort of at this point in the narrative of the crucifixion, there's a full stop, if you will, that things are sort of held in suspense or held in darkness until Easter Sunday.
Right.
I think of, at the Covenant Church, a few times we had, like, I think it's called a Thais service, where there's a darkening, and it's to engage the senses with what is believed to have happened on, you know, at the crucifixion. Things become dark, and then everyone leaves in a darkened from a darkened sanctuary Sunday morning. The black cloth is taken off, the symbol of the cross, and it's light again. Uh, Certainly, this is a different take on that.
Yes, it is very
Um,
different.
you're drilling deeply here,
Yeah,
and I respect that. There is a message of life here that doesn't have to wait until Sunday morning,
right.
um,
That's a
which
great insight, Steve, and that is
I
so.
like.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, Steve, I grew up in the Lutheran church. I don't know where you and what church you grew up in, but I grew up with the same belief as everything went dark until Sunday morning. And yeah, this was an interesting take on it this morning, Mike. That that how you've presented that to us. But yeah, my
Yeah.
belief is everything just really kind of went dark until Sunday morning.
There is so much here about belief. I mean, this was just installment one, but there's some really interesting things about faith and belief in the coming session. So before Sunday morning, including Sunday morning. Yeah. Thank you, Dean. Yeah. That's because the way I think probably the three of us were raised, the cross that it is finished was kind of it. It was kind of the pinnacle. And I've been talking a lot about how the thrust of the new, in fact, last week's session, the thrust of the New Testament is about union with Christ. And that is the perspective that I'm working from, which you saw. That's why we're talking about it the way we're talking about it this morning. It's not over, that we don't all go home and go to bed and wait till Sunday morning. There is a lot going on during this interim period. So,
Hey, Mike, I got a couple of thoughts. And I can see how love continued through the events of the cross. What I see though, and I continue to see in John's narrative is one, obviously he wrote this after the fact, and there were a couple of things. He was pointing out, and we see that in the verses that follow and that we'll look at next week. But I think he's attempting a couple things. One, that that Jesus fulfilled prophecy. One of those is that no bones were broken. So
that's coming up. Yeah.
they didn't break Jesus's bones. Therefore, this prophecy was fulfilled in that. He was also battling, I think, some of the things that people said later on, that Christ never really died. So when he showed back up, he hadn't died. He just was, you know, in the grave for a few days and then came back. The
He was
proof,
elsewhere.
yeah, the proof of his death was in the biological. When they stabbed him, both blood and water flowed out of him, which I agree. That's a picture of life flowing from him. But that was proof that he was dead, because if he were still alive, it would have just been blood. But blood and water was proof that he had suffocated. He was now dead. And I think that's part of what John was trying to say is Christ had died. And so those that are arguing that he never died, we have proof that he did. Therefore, his resurrection is true. And he said in the following verses, I'm saying all this and just showing you that it's true. What I've been telling you, this whole letter or this whole story I've been writing is true. I've seen it. And that disproves what some people later on said that Christ never died. And if Christ never died, then he never rose from the dead, and therefore we're still in our sin. I think part of what John is saying here was proof that Christ was who he said he was, and what he did on the cross was God's plan for our salvation.
Right. And that is much more in line with what you're saying, is much more in line with how I was brought up. And um, I'm not trying to discard that, but I think there is my point, Jeff, is that I think there is another way we can read this. And of course, this is in line with, 1,000 years of history. I'm not just pulling this out of my pocket here. Um, that can give us a more of an alignment with what is going to happen as the writers in the New Testament.
I think
So,
this topic,
anyway, I think uh, Dave, if you could hold that. Bill has had his hand up, and his poor arm is just going to fall off here. So let's let Bill talk first, and then Dave, you jump in after that. Yeah, go ahead.
I see that hand back there.
Yeah,
Well, this took me right to Isaiah 53 because this passage must have been sitting in their minds like a time bomb, wondering who they're talking about to explode right now. Here's the passage.
yeah,
It says, "Surely he took our pain and bore our suffering, and yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him, afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed." Now, when you go back up there, it says, "Yet we considered him punished by God."
yeah,
They were already promoting the punitive, what's the punitive action? God's doing this, and
yeah,
they said, "No, he is not being punished by God."
yeah.
And just that little phrase could kind of wreck the whole concept of this. I can't. What was it called?
Right. Yeah,
And anyway, but I mean, all that just describes what's going on here. And if somebody had their scroll and was reading it, I looked at it and said, okay, yeah, I see what's going on now. But it would take a long time till people like the guys who go back and join the church, if you will, and go back in their prophecy and say, "Oh my gosh, look what happened. No wonder we didn't understand this."
yeah. I
That's
think
just
what you're saying is Isaiah 53 is used as a proof text that God is punishing his son on the cross. But with a more fuller reading in context, it's the contrary to that.
yes.
Yeah.
And that was already established. I don't know why the penal substitution thing came later, just to totally ignored this verse.
Well, they actually just pulled that verse out and used it for, well, see, that's God punishing his son. God, the whole idea of God turning his face away from the son. We heard about that on Sunday. And my God, why hast thou forsaken me? As proof that God turned away. That's a real big one. Well, there's another explanation. I wrote a paper on that. If you guys want to pull it up on our website under Gospel of John material, I'm providing an alternative way, again, in sync with thousands of years of history, how that's interpreted. So anyway, now, Dave, your comment.
yeah, if the old guy can remember here that long.
I know the feeling.
Going back to your not topic, but your mentioning of the feeling of darkness and everything is dark until the resurrection morning. I think in the context again of what John is trying to present, I think we have to remember that John and others of the disciples and others who were close followers of Jesus, they indeed were in a psychological, emotional, and even spiritual darkness. They
Yes,
were
they were.
very confused. They were very worried. They were very concerned. They didn't know what was happening. So, from the standpoint of that reality for what they were dealing with in real time, I think that darkness can be a valid explanation for what was going on. That if that transfers to us, I'm going to take a little bit of a leap here, because I think it's important the way I've kind of come to view it. we have the spear, and we have the blood, which represents life, and we have the water, which I think represents the word, which is another way of explaining life shared. The
Yeah.
word provides the ability, the context in which we can share life with one another.
Hmm.
But really, this is to me too as a representative of a point. There've been many topics and sermons about grace, and I think it's relevant here. What the cross is presenting is who was the famous author that wrote two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the path less traveled. Robert Frost. The cross represents a division in the life of the disciples. They can decide, well, what am I going to do here?
Right.
I can either roll over and play dead, or I can walk forward in faith. And that faith requires grace. And this is the little bridge or leap that I'm going to make, because I think the church at large has grossly misinterpreted grace. And I think if you go back to Genesis and look at what God created and what He wanted with us as people, we lost that because of sin. But grace doesn't free us to no longer need to appropriate the transformed life, which is what Jesus just did.
Mhm.
He presented the transformed life. But grace doesn't allow us, take away the need for that. What it does is it makes it possible for us to choose that life.
Hmm.
And I'll stop now.
I think I understand. We were suffering from some sort of audio thing, and I got maybe 60%, 70%. So you're looking at the crossroads as demonstrated right here, the intersection, or the split, as choice. You ended with the word choice. You're saying it's brought us to a place of choice. Is that right?
Grace is what gives us, what makes it possible for us to choose which road we're going to take.
Right.
It
Yeah.
doesn't absolve us from responsibility of walking a transformed life, but it does give us the ability and makes it possible for us to choose the proper one.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. Good. Thank you. Thanks for clarifying that for me. I got that. So thanks, Dave. Other thoughts, fellas?
I was thinking along the lines of what Dave just shared about, after the execution of their savior, and now you got to make a decision. Which way am I going? The Robert Frost road choice, and got so much doctrine involved here. It's amazing. Uh, in the next chapter, I think it is John 21. You
20.
kind of get.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
I interrupted you. Sorry. Go ahead.
In the next chapters, plural, the one of which I'm talking about is 21.
Yeah.
Peter says, "I go a fishing." Life goes on. I mean, our guy died, and we watched it happen, and he's in the tomb now, and he died, and we thought this was going to go different, but it didn't. In the meantime, I got life to live here. I've got bills. I've got Matthew might be knocking on my door looking for taxes soon. Who the heck knows, And it's so I go a fishing, and I got to get back to the way things were, And then Jesus, oddly enough, appears to him, of course, but it's it makes me think of, we have one, in my mind, we have one life, one world, where it's all kind of theoretical, ethereal, mental. Is it which atonement theory should I adhere to? What is it? The sack around his heart was filled with water, and that's what they pierced, and that's why water came out. And I don't know. I have no idea. All I know is today is a day that I need to live, and I'm normally a fisherman. So I'm going to go back and fish because I got to get back to life and I got to get back to moving on to what I'm doing because the world did not stop spinning. And that's what made me think of, the fork in the road, your response to one's response to what happened on the cross. You can forever theorize, and not that we're doing that, but Peter had an opportunity to sit there and just mourn. Oh my God, I thought this was going to be so different. I thought this was going to change everything. And Rome is still here, breaking my horns. What's the deal? I'm going to go back fishing. That's what I know how to do. That's what I always did do. That's what's necessary for me to continue my life. So that's what I'm going to do. But it wasn't until the day of Pentecost
Right. Mm-hmm.
that it really changed for him, at least from my doctrinal background.
Yeah, that seems to be in the text. Yeah.
Text or not, I don't have it. I've got a phone. As I look it up, I look at the receiving of Holy Spirit. They were endued with power from on high, and he became a different person. It was even the eyewitness account of what he saw with his own senses was not sufficient to make him a different person. It was the receiving of Holy Spirit that changed him from being somebody that denied him. I don't know the man, leave me alone, in the courtyard. You were with him. You were one of his followers, right? And he goes, I don't know who he is. Changed him from being that guy to being, behold their threatenings. Now grant unto thy servant that with all boldness we may speak thy word. And he became a different guy. There was a big deal that happened, and the death on the cross allowed Holy Spirit to be received. If you look at it as a time event, now that I am no longer on the earth, I'm going to send a helper, and that's going to change you people. You're going to be a different guy altogether. And you look at the book of Acts and you see the evidence of that. These are not the same people as they were in the Gospels. So that's what I thought,
Yeah. Thank you, Vin.
whatever that means.
Thanks, Vince. Yeah. Thank you. Other thoughts, fellas? Any?
Can I clarify something?
Of course. And then I think Jeff.
I'll just be real quick. But when I was reading that passage from Isaiah, I think I was misunderstood. Isaiah is writing, and he's used the word we. So he's writing about immersing himself as part of Israel. And it says, we considered him punished by God, stricken by him and afflicted. There's your penal substitution part of it. But then he says, not so. He was pierced for, in other words, he's saying, don't take up that statement. That's wrong. And if people read that, I don't know how they ever would have come up with penal substitutionary atonement when he says, don't you dare say he was afflicted by God. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, you're kind of focused in on that this morning. And of course, that's one aspect, but what you're saying is true. And we're all subject to looking and interpreting the text through our own lenses and glasses, through our own, that's true of all of us, including me. We're all there. So, but there are better readings than others, that's for sure. You guys have all mentioned darkness, and that is so true about this time. Steve started out early with darkness, and Dave, I think, and I think Jeff talked about the darkness, the proof, and so forth. Where we're going to enter into the next several sessions is this idea of the context is darkness. Now, for the religious world, there is no darkness. They haven't entered the darkness because they don't believe there is a darkness. For the Roman world, there is no darkness. It's life as usual. We got our job done. We'll take the weekend off. But according to some people, that this book, the audience for this people, the people that are moving into faith, and that there is a darkness. And the truth is, fellas, life is always born out of darkness. There is no life if there is no darkness, because I don't need life. But there is the possibility through faith of life out of darkness. But we have to get to the darkness first. And that's what we're grappling with. And that's
The
where
lady who wrote that hymn that we listened to this morning was definitely experiencing some darkness,
yeah,
and she had learned what it was that was going to get her through that darkness.
yeah. That's really very
Trusting in
true.
Jesus.
Steve introduced that hymn as a person who's writing out of experience, and that is so true. Yeah.
Hey, Mike, I hate
Yeah,
to get
yeah, Jeff,
off
go
of
ahead.
this deep discussion, but I kind of caught another lesson, at least for myself, at the
Yeah,
very beginning of what we were reading about this morning. But and we talked about it a little bit, but the the leaders of the church asked that there not be dead bodies on these crosses as they go into this holy
holy time.
celebration.
Yeah,
Okay, as they come before God, they don't want
right.
this in their way. And my thought was, yeah, they don't want any proof of their guilt in all of this. They want Christ removed from. They didn't care about the other two, but they wanted Christ removed because he was evidence of what they had done. And too many times I think in my own life, I sometimes try to hide from God what I've done, so that I can come into his presence. You know what I'm saying? I want to uh, I don't want there to be any evidence of my guilt when I go before God, when that is the exact opposite of what I need to do. I need to come before God with my guilt so that he can, as he did here on the cross, forgive it. But it just struck me as something that the leaders of the church at that point, they just wanted to get rid of the evidence of what they had done, and that's why they wanted the bodies removed before they ever went into this celebration of Passover this time before God. And how often do I do that in my own life? Try to get rid of the evidence of my
Yeah,
guilt. Well, and that's just the opposite of what God wants me to do. He wants me to bring that evidence to him so can he can get rid of it, or he can cover it, or he can forgive me for it. So that was just a side thought.
yeah. Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, fellas, thank you all for today. And that little reminder of this image right here, what John is drawing our attention to within the text, verse 35, we'll look at that next week, is a way to understand, or at least to attempt to understand what is happening on the cross, the spear and the blood and the water. Fellas, have a good week, and
You as well.
we'll see you. We'll see you next Wednesday. Today's Ash Wednesday, fellas. Yes,
Yes.
yes.
Mm.
Bye for now.
See
Thanks,
ya.
Mike.
Bye bye.
You guys.